So this little video is about life cycles. We're going to look at the life cycles of frogs, which is a type of amphibian, and humans. This diagram shows the life cycle of a frog. Now the frog takes many different forms throughout its life as it develops into an adult frog. We start off with a mass of eggs called frog spawn, which are fertilised. So we have a fertilised egg, and then the eggs then divide through cell division, and some of the cells specialise, which is known as differentiation, until we produce a little organism called a tadpole, which has a tail and eyes and a little head. And then over time, as it develops, the instructions which are encoded in the DNA of all the cells start to be used to form legs, hind legs, and then forelegs, and then these legs develop, and then the tail gets shorter, and we end up with an adult frog. And now this adult frog is capable of either laying its own eggs or fertilising eggs, and is capable of reproduction. So life cycles, the first two learning objectives are parts of the body that change in male and females. We've looked at those already in the task and comparing the changes between male and females, humans. And then this part is describe an animal's life cycle using a diagram and compare the life cycles of two organisms. The way that we're going to assess that is I'm going to ask you to complete a table where you look at differences between the life cycles of frogs and humans. So we've got a frog and a human. So when studying life cycles, try to answer the following questions. Does this species use internal or external fertilisation? In the very first lesson that you did during lockdown of this topic, we looked at internal and external fertilisation. Humans use internal fertilisation, and because of that, you need a way of getting the gametes to meet and fuse, and that's where you have sexual intercourse, or external fertilisation, where one organism of one sex lays eggs and the other one releases sperm. Does the embryo develop internally or externally? So all organisms which lay eggs, the embryo develops externally, whereas mammals and marsupials, to a certain extent, the embryo develops internally. Do the offspring look like the parents? So when they hatch out of the egg, do they look like the parents? So in the case of the frogs, the tadpole doesn't really look like a frog. In the case of humans, a baby, it does look like a mini human. The proportions are all different. The head is much larger and the limbs are much shorter. It still looks like a human though, much more than a tadpole looks like a frog. Does this species need water for reproduction? If it uses water for reproduction, it tends to be external fertilisation and the embryo develops externally. How long does it take until the young can reproduce? So a lot of organisms which use water for reproduction, and this is the case of fish, amphibians, and also insects, the eggs develop and then they live as a juvenile stage in the water. So whilst they're living in the water, they need to have adaptations to allow them to get oxygen from the water instead of breathing air. They need to be able to move in the water, so have a tail. But then if the second part of their life, the next life stage, involves being terrestrial, which means on land, then they're going to need different adaptations. So their body does have to change dramatically to be able to live on land, as opposed to when it's younger and it lives in the water. And what are the gametes? Are they sperm and egg, for example? So here's the frogs. February, March, the female releases eggs into the water. The male releases sperm on top of the eggs. Some of them will be fertilised, most of them will be fertilised, but some of them won't. But that's the risk you take with external fertilisation. External. The frog spawn and many fertilised egg cells all sort of clump together. Tadpoles hatch out from the eggs at about 30 days after fertilisation. Does the embryo develop internally, externally? It develops externally. Sperm and egg are the gametes. And then we have at 12 to 14 weeks, tadpoles develop legs and their tails start to disappear. And then adult frogs become sexually mature at about 3 years old. So it's still quite a long time from development, but obviously it's much shorter than it takes for humans. We take, at least 16 years to become sexually mature. Do the offspring look like the parents? They do after they've passed the tadpole stage, but not initially. How long does it take until the young can reproduce? 3 years. This is just an image that I found. This is another organism which goes through life stages, and these life stages, they all look very different. So it lays eggs, the eggs hatch, and we have little tiny caterpillars. The caterpillars go around eating everything, and they grow in mass until they're quite large caterpillars. And when they've got big enough and got enough stores of energy, they will then perform a chrysalis, and where the DNA allows their body to change until you get either a moth or a butterfly. So metamorphosis, which is quite an interesting word to learn, is a biological process by which an animal develops after the birth or hatching, and it is a conspicuous, which means obvious, and abrupt, so that means sudden, change in the animal's body structure through increasing the number of cells and increasing the size of those cells, but also increasing the number of different types of cells. That's what differentiation means. Lots more different specialised cells. Remember, we looked at specialised cells in the first topic at the beginning of the year. So here's a little diagram to show you the life cycle of humans. We have a female produces an egg cell, a male produces a sperm cell. They combine together and the nuclei of the both of them fuse to form a fertilised egg, which then forms an embryo, which then forms a fetus, and then we get a baby, and the baby is born, and the baby increases in size to become a child, and then the child will go through changes due to sex hormones to become an adolescent, and then will mature into an adult. So we use internal fertilisation. Do we need water for reproduction? No, we do not. Does the embryo develop internally or externally? We should know by now that it develops internally in the uterus, and it receives nutrition from the placenta. And what are the gametes? They are sperm and egg cells. Do the offspring look like their parents? Yes, a bit smaller and slightly different proportions, but yes, they do look like a mini human. How long does it take until the young can reproduce? At least 16 years, perhaps longer, until individuals are capable of sexual reproduction. Now, we're going to try and compare them. I've included a table on the task. What I'd like you to do is copy that out in your exercise books and then use this table on this presentation to fill that in. You can always pause the video to get the right answers. So here's the table. Method of fertilisation, is it internal or external? So the frog should be external, human internal. What are the gametes? Sperm and egg. Sperm and egg. Do they use sexual reproduction? Both of them use sexual reproduction. Where does the embryo develop? Externally, internally for frogs, internally for humans. Is the water needed for reproduction? Yes for frogs, no for humans. Are the offspring and adults alike? No for frogs, yes for humans. How long does it take to mature to be able to reproduce? About 3 years for frogs, 16 years possibly for humans. Okay, so I'd like you to use that information to complete the table. Thank you.